morning and welcome to Morning Movie News. On Friday afternoon, I had to be out of the office for personal reasons, and sure enough, as soon as I left my computer, a big movie news story breaks, and that's that Rian Johnson is taking over the Star Wars new trilogy, 8 and potentially 9, from JJ Abrams. Twitter lit up, and I lit up like a Christmas tree of rage that once again I had missed a big news story due to a personal conflict. I flashed back to the Jesse Eisenberg as Lex Luthor casting news from earlier this year when I happened to be celebrating my grandmother's 90th birthday in Pittsburgh. How inconvenient. But then I started to calm down when I remembered that, oh yeah, nobody cares about Star Wars movie news. And sure enough, just like the Gwendolyn Christie Lupita Nyong'o casting news never really materialized into the full-blown hype that Disney and Lucasfilm were hoping, this Rian Johnson news, again, it was a quick blip of excitement. As I said, Twitter lit up, but then it just faded away, and everyone just forgot about Star Wars and went back to worrying about the Marvel versus DC cinematic universe war, which seems to be much more compelling. And if I were Disney and Lucasfilm, I would really be concerned that no matter what kind of announcement I make, I just can't make a dent in the fanboy and fangirl, community. For some reason, there's just no traction here, and that's very alarming for this new trilogy in general. And I'd be very curious to see what this does with the box office, because it's just not a big news story. And as Star Wars has either it passed, as its heyday passed, was too much damage done with the prequels, or maybe this is not exciting news to the general public. Perhaps there's some members of fandom who like this casting news, because Rian Johnson, not a big name. If you were to go outside of fanboy circles, they would probably not know who Lucasfilm had picked. They'd be like, who did they choose? And I would say that would go with a lot of the other choices that Lucasfilm has been making lately. So let's discuss as to whether or not this is a good idea or a bad idea. Or I guess right now it's officially a meh idea because, again, not really gaining any traction in the movie-going community, at least in the online demographic. Some of you have said, oh, hype doesn't matter. Snakes on a Plane and Scott Pilgrim would have been big successes if that were the case. And I would say to you, that's not necessarily true. You're talking about like very specific kind of hype. A lot of people commenting on it in like places like, when those movies came out, ain't it cool? But you can really tell how popular a movie is going to be based on the YouTube searches for it, and also just how much coverage you're seeing, in the different areas of the media. Because if people continue to cover a movie, it's because they know it gets hits. Keep that in mind. Entertainment Weekly, for instance, kept running Fault in Our Stars stories because they knew it would get hits. It's a numbers game. Just like the news, the regular news has turned into a ratings race with the 24-hour news cycle, so is movie news. It's getting ratings, and the stories that get picked are the ones that bring people in. Fortunately, Morning Movie News has 3 slots. The first 2 are for stories that garner headlines and attention, and people are curious about those stories. And then you guys wanted to keep that 3rd story, and I'm glad you fought for it because that's where the news goes that isn't a big draw because that 3rd story can't fit into the metadata for the video. So that's a little bit of behind-the-scenes information about how Morning Movie News comes together. But anyway, Rian Johnson. My first reaction to this news was, where the heck is JJ Abrams going? I wonder if he has sequel-itis after the way Star Trek Into Darkness turned out. He's like, I'm not going down that road again. I worked really hard to deliver a sequel, and everyone crapped all over it. Although I would say, did you really work that hard, JJ Abrams? Because I saw the end result. Some of you did like Star Trek Into Darkness, but I feel, let's not forget that Star Trek fans voted it the worst Star Trek movie of all time recently, and I think it really, shot Benedict Cumberbatch's career in the foot, at least on the big screen, and I think the only thing that could potentially revive it, besides maybe an Oscar nomination for the Imitation Game, would be this Doctor Strange rumor that he might be up for that role at Marvel. So Marvel would save yet another person, although I think he's too close to his Sherlock Holmes character. But anyway, I was just wondering, JJ Abrams, where the heck are you going? And your lack of commitment to the entire trilogy disturbs me. There's a disturbance in the force, and it's the lack of JJ Abrams' commitment to this new trilogy. Because you could think he'd be on board and want to finish his story, but I guess not. I guess he's like, I'm going to set it up, throw a lot of lens flare in there, and then I'm going to bail. Maybe Lawrence Kasdan will stick around, and maybe we can have a through line there. Maybe Kathleen Kennedy is very strongly involved in overlooking this. So we'll see. But Rian Johnson is definitely taking over for episode 8. He will write and direct it, and then he's also starting to, develop episode 9. His deal isn't firmly in place to helm that one, but he's at least laying the groundwork for it. Now, a lot of people were excited about this news, and I would say I am excited about the potential darkness and seriousness of this new Star Wars trilogy and the spin-offs that are being planned, because we're definitely getting a distinct flavor at this point, considering the talent that's being brought on board. And it's all very different from JJ Abrams. JJ Abrams, is almost a Joss Whedon-y choice. Very mainstream, very commercial. Joss Whedon, of course, his stuff kept getting canceled, but he still had a very mainstream kind of feel to his work. It's bright, it's cheery, it's funny, whereas this new talent being brought in is not cheery, bright, and funny. They're in the total opposite direction. So I think it's interesting that not only is J.J. Abrams leaving, but there's no one around to continue his work, his very distinct, not distinct, I guess you could call it, some people, I would say, Spielberg light, but everybody likes Spielberg. And Spielberg, of course, was, involved in a lot of George Lucas's original projects, and I think helped make them great, and that's part of why everyone thinks so highly of Steven Spielberg. But so Rian Johnson, and he's the latest addition, and this is a major addition because he's not just doing a spin-off, he's in the main through line here. Then, of course, we have Josh Trank and Gareth Evans. And these guys are, very dark, independent storytellers. And that's another interesting thing. It's almost like you're having like an indie trilogy and bringing that level of talent up to the big leagues. Now, what I think is very interesting is that these all seem like very Christopher Nolan choices. The same kind of sensibility where he was at in his career, both creatively and aesthetically and also professionally, is the same level I think a lot of this talent is at. And when I reviewed Godzilla, I said I thought Gareth Evans borrowed heavily from Christopher Nolan and Steven Spielberg, actually. So we'll see which side wins out when he does his Star Wars spinoff. But I just think that Nolan, when he signed on for Batman, let's see where his career was at. He did Memento, Insomnia, The Prestige, in between Batman Begins and The Dark Knight. And, that was a rocky time for him. I know there are a lot of Nolanites out there who think that Christopher Nolan can do no wrong, but Memento was a fantastic breakthrough film. Insomnia had a lot of problems, not a box office success. And I think The Prestige, while interesting, also there was some structural problems story-wise. And that's something that concerns me about Rian Johnson. Say what you will about Looper and all the attention that it got, Looper had a lot of loopholes structurally as a film. And so having Rian Johnson as a writer, that's concerning to me. And I hope somebody maybe will come in and overlook his work. Just like David Goyer, great idea man, poor in his execution of said ideas. So I just feel there's a very Nolan feel to these Star Wars movies, and while Warner Brothers is moving away from that with Zack Snyder, it's interesting to see that maybe Star Wars sees an opportunity to go in and get that prestige fanboy audience that Godzilla also drew upon to great success. There's a huge audience for this. I know a lot of people now that Nolan's gone, it's popular to say, oh, I actually never liked Nolan's trilogy, but say what you will, now, but it's undeniable that Nolan changed the entire blockbuster genre filmmaking medium in terms of box office and prestige. We've talked about this before, and of course, that shouldn't go away. And so the question is, who's going to pick up the ball now that the Warner Brothers DC movies have dropped it? Legendary, I guess to some degree it was their ball to begin with because they were instrumental in that Nolan trilogy. They picked him for the gig and produced those films, and so I guess they were like, let's utilize it on Godzilla quite effectively, and maybe Disney, Lucasfilm is like, why don't we do that? And I have to say, it would be a welcome change of pace for the Star Wars movies alone because they just got a little bit too kid-friendly and almost like Saturday morning cartoons, the bad kind, with George Lucas's prequels. So I'm nervous about these choices. I feel they're very risky, but I think the payoff is huge. And even though I had problems even with Godzilla, I was quite happy, obviously, with the box office numbers. And a lot of that, even though there were story problems there as well, a big, this is the Achilles heel of all these movies. The story must be good. I think that's one of the reasons a lot of people liked X-Men Days of Future Past, because it had a good story, and Captain America the Winter Soldier, both very solid storylines. But I feel I'm very excited about Star Wars going this darker, more serious direction. It's exactly what I wanted for the franchise. Now let's just see if these are the guys to pull it off. Because, I think they all had problems. Gareth Evans, again, problems with Godzilla. Josh Trank, Chronicle might have only been cool because of Dane DeHaan. We'll find out with Fantastic Four. And then, of course, Rian Johnson. Everyone likes to talk about Brick and Looper, but they all conveniently forget about the brothers Bloom. All right, so that's the first story of the day, and I'm curious to how you guys feel. Do you like the new potential darker direction? Do you think these are good choices? And what do you think of, does JJ Abrams no longer fit in this franchise, even though he's the one who's kickstarting this new wave? All right, so the second story of the day, it's big comic book news day. Netflix's Daredevil is starting to flesh out. We're getting more casting announcements. Of course, we have Vincent D'Onofrio as Kingpin, and Charlie Cox from Boardwalk Empire and Stardust, that Matthew Vaughn movie opposite Claire Danes a couple of years ago, as our Daredevil. And Rosario Dawson just joined the cast. And it was very vague blurb about who she'll be playing, and the way it reads is, she'll be playing a dedicated young woman whose quest to heal the wounds of Hell's Kitchen brings Matt Murdock, Charlie Cox, unexpectedly crashing into her life, while her own journey forever alters the course of his battle against the injustices of this broken city. A lot of people said Elektra, but I'm with the group of people who feel it's going to be Kirsten McDuffie. Who? Not Karen Page even? Yes, Kirsten McDuffie is a new character that's been brought into the current Daredevil run by Mark Waid. By the way, the current Daredevil run is phenomenal, and if the television series can be anywhere as good as this, I'd actually, I have to say, the current run of Daredevil is very network television, and I think to get that cable television feel that Daredevil's going to need to survive, not just on Netflix, but in the very competitive current field of cable dramas, I think it needs to go more of the Frank Miller route. It needs the grittier, darker route. So I would have loved to have seen Rosario Dawson be Elektra. I would love to see Elektra in this story in general, but I don't think that's who she's been cast as, and I think they're going to go with her as the Kirsten McDuffie character, who's another lawyer and a love interest for Matt Murdock in the comic. And they have a very, His Girl Friday kind of relationship, which, I just talked about in my trailer review for The Judge, can be a little grating, so I get a little nervous about that. I don't want one of those meet cutes like, oh, the only person who, calls Daredevil on being a jerk or something is Kirsten McDuffie. She's irresistible because of that. I just don't like that kind of spunky, mean female character that Hollywood seems to adore. Even though the run is very good right now on Mark Waid's Daredevil, I actually don't like her character in it. But I think that's who she'll be playing, and I think she's there to really focus on the legal aspects of the series and the character to make sure that it doesn't fade into the background. It just becomes another vigilante. I think they're going to really focus on Matt Murdock's work, a lot of pro bono work, a lawyer in Hell's Kitchen. The original idea of the concept is that by day he fights criminals in court, and at night he fights them on the rooftops, I guess you could say. So I think that's a very good thing to underline, but Foggy Nelson should be the one who's keeping that in the storyline, and I think putting the love interest there, I don't know how I feel about that. That might weigh it too much on the legal side, but maybe the legal scenes are cheaper to film. That also might be very telling. But I would prefer Foggy Nelson to be on the legal side and Elektra over, and not like the Jennifer Garner Elektra. I'm talking Elektra Nachios, the assassin who never misses, but yet finds her heart pierced by Daredevil. Oh, I love it so much. All right, so I'm curious to what you think. Do you think Rosario Dawson is well cast here? She obviously is no stranger to Frank Miller's work from her work in Sin City, but, again, do you think she's well cast not only in the series, but as potentially Kirsten McDuffie? Or do you think she'd make a good Elektra? Or do you think they dodged a bullet on this one and she'd be a horrible Elektra? And also, what do you think about the way the show is starting to come together? I have my doubts. It seems very television-like. I'm a little nervous. We'll see. But, I think it's going to have strong Irish roots as well, with, of course, Charlie Cox cast. And that could be interesting. We'll see. We have no idea how this is going to come together thematically. And I think that's the biggest question mark and the most important thing for them to nail. All right, so let's move on to the third story of the day. There's a rumor going around because there was a photo that was snapped at the recent, merchandising convention that there's going to be a Guardians of the Galaxy animated series. I think that's a very interesting decision. Of course, Guardians of the Galaxy is Marvel's big gamble. We talk about it a lot. And I have to say, as much as people don't care about Star Wars news, Guardians of the Galaxy, in my opinion, is the only upcoming movie in the near future that audiences are heavily anticipating and are excited about, which I find fascinating. Most of the attention is still focused on Frozen, Godzilla, Maleficent. That's still really very much taking up people's attention. And of course, Warner Brothers DC and Marvel News. And in that vein, Guardians of the Galaxy. I think that they've done a great job advertising this movie. They got very far out in front of it. and I think that was important to give people time to adjust to this different, zanier tone, and I think it's succeeded, and I think that Guardians of the Galaxy could open quite big. It's not going to be $100 million. I don't think that's going to be the case because it's a new property, but it's going to be big. It could be, 70 or 80 million we could be looking at, maybe 60, but a very, very good number, and I think it's going to maybe perform over the entire month of August. So I think Marvel's gamble is looking more and more like it will pay off. But then, of course, it looks like they really want to make sure that people are into this, series of characters, because they're talking about not only sequels to Guardians of the Galaxy, but spin-off movies for each member of the team, which I think is maybe pushing their luck a little bit. So this animated series, is something they're trying to get merchandisers excited about, as it eventually will be announced. Now, Marvel has always had some problems in the animation department. They, of course, Ultimate Spider-Man not well received, Avengers Assemble, also I think doesn't really have much traction as a show, and it's always unfortunate because, of course, Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes was canceled for Avengers Assemble, and a lot of people fear, well, that's a good word too, Freudian slip, that the replacement series was inferior in terms of quality. And so my question to you is, how do you think animation is best used? Should animation be used to develop properties that have not yet made it to the big screen, or should it be used to fortify properties that are on the big screen? Now, my opinion is I think it should go into the development area, because when you have a film that's already on the big screen, it becomes much more protected by the suits. So your creative possibilities are really limited what you can do, because you have to please the suits, and everyone's worried you're going to break the cash, you're going to kill the cash cow. So that's why when you see something like Guardians of the Galaxy, so many people are going to be involved in making sure that it toes the company line. And I think that's why certain animated shows and even comic books today play more like advertisements from the marketing department than really strong creative stories served up by the people that should be doing it. And this has been my big problem with comic books actually lately, that I feel they're more serving as promotional materials for the films than their own standalone stories that just further the people's love for the characters, which is obviously what they should be. But they're not, at least not right now. Hopefully we'll go back to the great storytelling that we were seeing in comics for a while from the big two, Marvel and DC. Also, when you have an animated series that's not tied into a movie property, you can build a fan base. Teen Titans, Young Justice. That series. Everyone loved Young Justice. I felt it kind of went off the rails towards the end, but still very well done, intense fan interest, and potentially could have played into a Teen Titans movie. But of course, as we all know, Warner Brothers and DC have a hard time following through on what is working. When there are other ideas they like to try for some reason that seem very sketchy. But we'll see. I am very curious about what Warner Brothers and DC are going to do, and of course, animation has always been one of their strong points. But it's like comparing Young Justice to Beware the Batman. Beware the Batman is set to toe the company line, serve as promotional material, keep that character in the spotlight, and make sure that kids become Batman fans. But it's nowhere near the quality of Batman the Animated Series when movies weren't really in the picture. Of course, they did change Catwoman to match Michelle Pfeiffer back then. So that there it was a little bit playing in there, but the animated series was largely left alone, especially after the Batman movies themselves started to have some problems, and so they were just like, let's just separate them and make sure that at least we have something that's good. But now that all these companies are so incestuous in their departments, you're seeing some creative problems and some quality problems. But Guardians of the Galaxy, I don't know. The zaniness could work very well for an animated series, but I'm a little concerned. And also because I just think it's going to serve as promotional material that's not particularly well done. All right, so those are the top 3 stories of the day, and on to the viewer question. This is from Mr. Sheen, obviously a Charlie Sheen fan. And Mr. Sheen says, "Hey Grace, really enjoy your show. I have a question. Maybe you can answer it this time. Fingers crossed. As I said, when you don't give up, eventually I get to your question." And I think Mr. Sheen's question today is quite appropriate with what we've been discussing. And as I said, that's a really good way to get your question picked. Now, of course, you don't know what I'm going to be discussing on future episodes, but you can roll the dice, especially if you're talking about a popular subject matter like Mr. Sheen is. So Mr. Sheen says, okay, this is his question. He says, "Is it just me, or have leaked photos from movie sets become the new way to hype a film? We saw it in Man of Steel, Days of Future Past, and now with all the Star Wars 7, Episode 7 shots." I think that Mr. Sheen isn't talking about like JJ Abrams' official leaks, or set photos, but the Millennium Falcon photos that leaked from the set shop when they showed them building that, and some of also the characters, the practical special effects they're doing with some of the alien creatures, etc. That's what I think Mr. Sheen is referring to. So Mr. Sheen says, I find it so hard to believe that on movie sets, where I'm sure security must be very strict, so many Star Wars shots have been leaked. I can't imagine a guy just taking pictures with his cell phone so easily. The movie production has to be behind that, right? I would really like to hear your thoughts on it. And do you think these are really leaked shots, or is it just a new gimmick? Excellent question. I think they're really leaked, and I'll tell you why. First of all, as far as security goes, if the U.S. military can't keep people from taking photos, of course, there's been a lot of scandals of soldiers taking photos of, of course, the scandal with the prisoners, etc., and leaking photos of what's going on, behind, the battle lines, which is supposed to be secretive. How can a movie set hope to have that kind of security? I think you'd be surprised at how easy it is to take a quick snapshot with your camera. They might assume you're doing it for work, maybe for reference. And also you can see that when the Star Wars shots were taken, for instance, it was empty in that studio, so in that workshop. So someone could have snuck in. It could have been an intern. It could have just been someone who, with access to this, to that special effects room. There's a lot of people that can get in there and just quickly take a photo. And so that's where that's coming from. Now, this is a new problem for Hollywood because there's such intense interest in movies before they come out. This is very new. It used to be the case where people very patiently waited for the movie to be released and then discussed it. But now, as we've said a few times here, and as I'm sure you're all very aware, it's all about anticipation these days. It's almost when a movie opens that it's not worth talking about anymore. The fun is over. We've seen it. Let's just let's jump on to the next movie to look forward to. So I think this is something Hollywood isn't used to. Now, of course, with set leaks like Man of Steel. Also, I think this was a big problem for The Dark Knight Rises, which I've said before. Those are shooting outside on location, and when they're shooting, in the old days, Hollywood movies would shoot on the studio lots, and of course, they have very good security there. They're really, inside the property. It's hard to get a good shot. They're not really visible to the general public. But now, as movies get more realistic, budgets are bigger, and audiences expect more, they can't really build a set as well as an actual city. So that's why, for instance, the Avengers went to Cleveland. Dark Knight Rises went to Pittsburgh, and so they have the general public can just easily pop out and take a photo. And to the point where on Captain America: The Winter Soldier, they had production assistants holding up signs saying, "Please don't take photos of our movie. You're spoiling plot twists." And as I said, and a number of us have discussed before, The Dark Knight Rises, the big reveal that it was Talia al Ghul wasn't that big a reveal because we all saw her in her Marion Cotillard in her Talia al Ghul getup from leaked set photos. And of course, for sure, the studio didn't want those out because I think it hurt the end product, and a lot of the twists in The Dark Knight Rises were given away. And another reason you can tell that these aren't, publicity, kind of like, undercover publicity for the movie, that they're intentionally doing it, is that when those Star Wars photos leaked about the Millennium Falcon, they went around to a lot of the movie sites and requested they be taken down. Of course, I think, TMZ is the one who broke the story. They're not taking anything down. But other places were like, we don't want to be sued by Disney. Disney will, come after us with a big vendetta. And then the photos were largely removed. Now, of course, once something's up on the internet, it's almost impossible to get it down. And you might recall the leak on the Frozen posters when they first revealed the looks for Elsa and Anna, and Disney had all those taken down, and because people were like, is that really what they're going to look like? They did end up looking just like that, but people ended up loving the result. But when the story first broke, people were like, oh, what a ripoff of Tangled. So to recap, Mr. Sheen, I don't think this is intentional because A, they're having the photos being pulled down once they go up, and B, they really take, they give away major plot points and spoilers, and no movie wants that. No movie wants to promote at the expense of the final product. As I said, the case in point, The Dark Knight Rises. Other times it's just been, you see the costume, etc. It hasn't been as spoilery as the Dark Knight Rises situation. So I would say that movie studios need to be a little bit more responsible about what they film in public, how they handle their security, and if you have big major twists, maybe you shouldn't reveal them on the streets of Pittsburgh, where someone's going to snap a photo and share it. I mean, I would say we could appeal to the better nature of those who are taking these photos and posting them on the internet, but again, it's a race for views and clicks, and people want to see this stuff as much as, some people might be annoyed by it. There's a clear and very large audience for it. It's just like there's paparazzi following celebrities around all the time trying to get crazy embarrassing shots. I guess you could say paparazzi is also developed for these big blockbuster franchise movies, and they're constantly being hunted and teased and harassed, and they're just going to have to find a way to live in this new world order of the media. So that's my answer to your question, Mr. Sheen. But I would say, though, it's kind of beneficial sometimes in terms of publicity, even if it's accidentally so, because you want to see that people are talking about your movie. You want to see that they're interested. And Star Wars should be happy that everybody was curious about those Millennium Falcon shots, because as I said from our first story today, people don't seem that excited about Star Wars news. All right, so that's today's morning movie news. Thank you for tuning in. Please write down below what you think of today's top 3 stories and the viewer question, and anything you'd like to see covered tomorrow, and any questions that you might have. Thanks for watching. Bye.